15 men on a dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum.
I would like to introduce the first of our authors today, Elizabeth Hirst, proprietor of Pop Seagull Publishing, and a fantastic writer. And you can find her works, Second Tent Down, and we all hope that you enjoy the reading. Come on up.
Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Hirst, and today I'll be reading from my novel Distant Early Warning, which is available at the Stephen B. Pearl Pop Seagull Publishing booth just past the kitchen. So, Distant Early Warning is an action-adventure, near-future science fiction novel about a young woman who has to go into Northern Ontario and combat a horde of monsters and put her father to rest, who has become one of them, and she doesn't know why or how, but she's going to have to figure that out. So I'm going to be reading a passage right now that features the best character, Geoff the dog. The presence of the children had reminded Denny that it was rent collection day. The girls took turns collecting money from the squatters in the backyard, and this month it was Denny's turn. She made her way down the empty driveway to the grey garden gate and knocked. The latch was easy to pick from the other side, but Denny never intruded on the mandrake's scant privacy. At the back of the house, she could smell multiple aromas that, because of the damp, stagnant air, had not been apparent at the front. The first was smoke, and meat, corresponding with the plume of campfire smoke rising over the privacy fence. The second was laundry soap. Denny wondered where the squatters had got real laundry soap, but she applauded the feat. And the third, much less pleasant to the nose, was baby diaper, sour and somehow powdery. Mrs. Mandrake answered the garden door. She was a thin woman, once genteel, with brassy blonde hair and sharp lines around her mouth. She wore a patched, stained button-down shirt that was probably a nice pink stripe once, and a picked brown flare skirt. In one arm, she carried a girl baby, and in the other, a knife. Her dour expression softened when she recognized Denny. "Oh, Denny, it's you," she said. "I thought it was Yasmin again and to complain about the noise." Denny stepped into the yard, the Mandrake's home for what it was worth. There was a long stretch of tarp and duct tape covering their living space, a complex of crate pieces nailed together and supported in places with broomsticks. Underneath, plastic Rubbermaid crates doubled as storage space for all their worldly possessions, and a means of keeping their sleeping bags off the ground. Jason, their 7-year-old, poked at a glowing fire with a stick. A miserable place to live, but every available room in the house was full, including the living room couch, and most houses nowadays were the same. Hopefully the government would finish the relief camps soon, so people like the Mandrakes could at least have a state-issued tent to live in. Mrs. Mandrake had been a secretary, or so she said, for a lumber concern in Thunder Bay. Mr. Mandrake had run a landscaping business. Both of them had lost everything when the screamers rose. The dead had risen from the ground, at night, and chased families from their homes, and screamed in a strange gibberish language that pierced the ears and warped the senses. People had gone mad in those first 3 months, unable to sleep and unable to rationalize what was happening to them. No one in Ontario had believed the refugees at first, because who, in the age of cell phones and the internet and all the other trappings of modern-day life, would believe that the dead could actually rise? And yet, the North was rapidly emptying itself, and there were testimonies, thousands upon thousands of them. Denny had believed the Mandrakes, even before True North Media Corp had gone up north and gotten the first national broadcast out. As someone who read made-up stories all day, Denny could recognize a yarn, and Mrs. Mandrake told stories that no one could or would make up. For instance, there was Mr. Mandrake's old business partner, the stone wholesaler, who jumped into a river glen after one of the screamers turned out to be his brother. That one always gave Denny the chills. Ghosts, wraiths, zombies. That was one outlandish thing. But having one as part of your family, you'd never escape them or the memory of what they had become for as long as you lived. And Dad was still missing. Denny shook off her macabre thoughts. People like the Mandrakes didn't need any more negativity flowing their way. "It's that time again, Mrs. M. It's my turn to collect the rent." Denny cringed for Mrs. Mandrake's inevitable arguments, the reasons, all true, that she didn't have this month's rent, the rising price of fresh food, little JJ growing out of his jeans, needing to go across town to the doctor on the bus. Denny prepared to argue, and prepared to feel bad for the rest of the night. As much as the mandrakes didn't have money, neither did she. She had covered for them before to deflect Yasmin's wrath, but the money had come out of her savings. She'd had to borrow textbooks from a classmate one semester in order to make up the money, and that had been a close call for her grades. No grades, no education. No education, no ticket inland, away from the flooding. Mrs. Mandrake set her knife down on a bloody piece of newspaper, where she'd been cubing some beef. She wiped her hands off on her apron. "I've got your money for once. There's something else we need to take care of first, though." Jason left the fire. He had a lean, freckled face and wore jeans ripped at the knee. "I want to keep him! Let me keep him!" he said, dancing around his mother. Mrs. Mandrake stilled him with a firm hand on his shoulder. "We've got no money, JJ. The only way he stays is if he eats your meals." "Keep who?" Denny asked. The feeling in her stomach spread out, grew sour. Mrs. Mandrake did not answer. She led Denny along the board fence, painted an ugly, peeling brown. Jason trailed behind them, sulking. They crossed the yard to where another alleyway extended down the house, between the wall and a chain-link fence. This gap dead-ended at the front of the house, and was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze down sideways. For as long as Denny had lived at the house, they had kept old clay pots and faded-out plastic lawn ornaments back there. Denny wasn't sure that what they were storing them for. They probably came from previous owners, back in the time when only one family lived there. A section of white plastic garden trellis tipped upward, then fell over. From underneath it crawled a black and white border collie, his shaggy fur tipped with mud. He held his tail down and kept his ears pulled back. Ratty blue collar, bone-shaped license tags. Denny's stomach flipped over into full-scale nausea then. "Geoff," she said, kneeling down and putting her arms out. "Come here, boy. It's okay." Geoff wagged his tail, remaining low to the ground. He crept toward Denny and flopped over onto her feet, the tip of his tail still wagging. His eyes were as large and glassy as shooting marbles. Denny scratched his head, ignoring the gross, dandery substance that collect on her fingers when she did so. Geoff stretched up toward her face and licked her chin. "This is my dad's dog. Geoff shouldn't be here without Dad," she said. "Someone kicked him out of a car onto our front lawn this morning, and we let him into the backyard. Ever since, he's been cowering in that pile of junk." "You never saw a man with him? A man with curly hair and an old bomber jacket?" Denny said, standing up. Geoff migrated over to her right hand, placing his head directly underneath it. Denny petted him absently, lost in a sea of half-formed, fearful thoughts. Mrs. Mandrake shook her head. "Denny, I've seen your father before. He wasn't here. I'm sorry." "Right," Denny said. She headed for the steps to the back porch, and the square of cool darkness visible through the screen door. Geoff followed her, not leaving her magical right hand for a moment. Denny wondered how long it had been since someone had petted him. "Denny," called Mrs. Mandrake as she squeezed the screen door handle. "What?" "I've still got rent for you." Denny pulled the door open. She let Geoff slip inside before her. "Could you put it in the mail slot? I have to make a few calls." She would also have to find a place to hide the dog. Thank you. So, if I've got a few minutes, I'd like to just say a little bit about the inspiration for the book. So, I think the first inspiration for this came when I heard the fairy tale of the Singing Bones, which is a Grimm's fairy tale, and basically a young prince is murdered because he's heir to the throne, and his brothers take over, and he dies and he's buried, and a minstrel comes along and hears his bones singing, and because the minstrel plays his song, he eventually gets justice, and his brothers are, overtaken, and it's come to light what they did to him. And so then I heard a statistic about the amount of unsolved mysteries in Northern Ontario, people that just go missing in the large expanses of wilderness and they can never find them. And I thought, what if they started singing their stories and, asking for justice? And so that's where the inspiration for the book comes from. And then I threw in a whole heap of adventure and a whole lot of lovable characters. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day at Pirate Fest.
This reading brought to you by Horn of the Kraken, and the other fine works of Stephen B. Pearl. For more of Stephen's works, please visit www.stphenpearl.com. Thank you.